All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third day of the 2021 Early Learner Forum. Again, my name's Kayla Klein. I'm the director of Black Hills Reads campaign, which is an education initiative under the United Way of the Black Hills umbrella. I'm also the public policy chair for the statewide Early Learner South Dakota initiative and organizer of this event. Another thing that may be relevant in this particular conversation is I am actually also the public policy chair for SDAUYC, which stands for the South Dakota Association for the Education of Young Children. Early Learner South Dakota's vision is that all children have access to high quality early learning experiences and environments to create a solid foundation for lifelong success. As a reminder, you can ask questions in the chat and I will be sure they get to Lauren during the session. And then also a reminder that the session will be recorded for later viewing. You're welcome to turn on your cameras if you'd like during the presentation. And before I give a little bit more on Lauren's background, I know that the president of SDAYC, Janessa Bixel, would like to say something. So go ahead, Janessa.
Thank you. I just especially wanted to say something, an extension from the South Dakota affiliate out here. I've had the privilege of working with Lauren over the last couple of years, getting really involved with this Early Learner South Dakota work. And Lauren has been an inspiration to my advocacy efforts. And I really hope everyone enjoys this training on Advocacy 101. And we're excited to have you here with us today, Lauren. Thank you.
Yes, I will have to say that my journey started with Lauren, gosh, almost about probably 7-8 years ago now. So I'm very excited to have her presenting to some of our South Dakota leaders. So thank you, Lauren, again. So Lauren Hogan is the Managing Director of Policy and Professional Advancement at the National Association for the Education of Young Children, NAEYC, or as many say, NACY, with responsibility for the portfolio that includes federal and state policy and advocacy, higher education accreditation, professional recognition, and applied research. She has developed and led NACY's bipartisan early childhood policy agenda with a keen focus on centering the voices of educators, shared leadership, innovation, diversity, and equity. She previously served as the Vice President of Programs and Policy at the National Black Child Development Institute. Lauren began her career working with an after-school program in Louisville, Kentucky, and later served as the director of an early literacy and family support program in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She also served as a public policy fellow in the Department of Social Services in Boston, Massachusetts. Lauren earned a bachelor's degree from Yale University and a master's degree in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School. So thank you again so much, Lauren, for being here. Why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Great, thank you guys so much. I'm delighted to be here with you all. There's nothing that fills my heart faster, especially on days, months, and years that are long, as these ones have been, than getting to connect with early childhood educators and advocates who we are in an extraordinary moment and an extraordinary opportunity to be able to move forward from the challenges that we've all been experiencing and really solve some of what's been plaguing childcare for far too many years, to be able to actually take this opportunity to move forward. So I'm so excited to be with you all. I am going to attempt to share my screen. We're going to see how successful I am with that. Okay. Can you see it? Excellent. Can you see all of my embarrassing number of tabs that I have open? Okay, great. I can only see some of you, so it's okay if I gave that away. My kids have all kinds of feelings about my insane number of tabs. All right. Okay. So we're just going to talk through today, and feel free to jump into the chat. If I can't see it, feel free to unmute and just ask questions as we go. I'm going to try not to use a ton of acronyms, but if I slip up and do so by accident, feel free to just call me out or ask me what that is or anything like that. I think, the most important thing to walk away from today, if you can, is just to know that it doesn't, there are moments where quantity is what's called for in advocacy, and we need to get all of our voices really loud. We need to get lots of sign-ons. We need to get lots of people to care about it. And there are many, in some cases, more moments when it is just honestly a few people doing the hard work of showing up that really push things forward, where the stories are what carry the day in the end and are really able to bring policymakers to a new understanding of what it is like in early childhood education. The pandemic has clarified so many things. I mean, we were in a crisis, childcare was in a crisis long before the pandemic, but the pandemic has clarified many things, among which is that our policymakers, the public, do not really understand childcare. They don't understand the budgets. They don't understand why it costs as much as it does. They don't understand how to drive quality. Helping them understand what's happening and how they can make policy better, because to make things better for the people on the ground is one of the best things we can do. And it's why we've been so focused on centering the voices of educators in all of our policy work, really bringing those voices in so that the policies are reflective of the needs on the ground and not made up by a bunch of people who don't have any idea what they're really talking about, which, let's be honest, is sometimes what happens in policy. This picture on the front is when we passed when we doubled the amount of funding for the Child Care and Development Block Grant. That right there is our new Senate Majority Leader, Senator Schumer. And it was a lot of work to get these folks to care about childcare substantially and to figure out how to make the kind of investments they could make. And getting them there, building this over time has been crucial to getting the kinds of investments that we've needed going forward. So I'm going to start just, I think for educators, for many of us who started out as educators who are thinking like, we're so overwhelmed with the work that we have to do in front of us. We all experience that on a day-to-day basis. It's really hard to get out and think about, why do I have to be an advocate? So if folks can either jump off of mute or throw it in the chat, just think about the answer to this question in terms of, why do I have to be an advocate? I'll give you just a few minutes. If you want to think about it in your head, that's fine too. Yeah, you can come off mute. There's not that many of us. We can chat.
You know, I would just say, I put this in the chat too, but for me, I feel as though I need to advocate because so many are fearful or don't think they can, or maybe don't have the abilities to be able to advocate. And so someone needs to be the voice in early learning.
And for me, I feel like my advocacy efforts started before I even realized they were advocacy efforts, when I was an assistant teacher sub and I saw things that could be changed, innovations or whatever, if you want to call it that. And I would go to my director or my supervisor, and I would have suggestions, and that was, I guess, my first step. And then now I think that's led me to my role where, I mean, I was an early childhood teacher for over 20 years, and I feel like I'm in a role now where I can help advocate for educators, which means so much to me. I mean, the children are very important too, but taking care of our early childhood educators is very, very dear to my heart. So
I would say too, bouncing off what Janessa said, when going out into the centers, I find that a lot of the teachers themselves know they want it to be better, but don't know the steps or have the time and energy to put into that. And so fortunately, being in the position that I am, we have a little bit more flexibility to help focus on that effort. I see that they struggle even advocating for themselves sometimes, so thinking about it in a bigger setting is a huge thing to wrap your head around. So,
Jessie, I think that's exactly right. I think we see in this field just a lot of, I mean, we are primarily women-led profession, and we are just committed to like pulling things together with some like string and some tape out of a bag. It's like, nope, we got it. We gonna make this work. Like everybody's just so committed to that ethic in some ways, that this idea of advocating for ourselves as educators, advocating for each other, is always about the children. Like we keep a focus on the kids, but advocating for the profession, for our own wages, for compensation becomes really hard for this profession, and helping to think about how to step forward and ask for what not just we sort of theoretically deserve, but have earned because of the work that happens in early childhood education settings, the skills, the competencies that are displayed is really an important part of being an advocate. And as you guys speak to this idea about when we have the privilege and the power to be at the tables to bring the voices of folks who aren't or who can't, and to ultimately bring those voices with us to those tables. I think, rooting our sort of experience, and we saw already Kayla doing this, talking about, when she was a director, what she saw, what experience, what we bring to the work. I will say, my team at NAYC, we get a lot of opportunities to talk to educators. We talk to educators all day, every day. That's how we do the work. But NAYC, like our finance and operations department, they don't get the chance to do that necessarily every day. So at a staff meeting last week, we brought an all staff. We had a couple of directors come and talk about their experience in the pandemic and just what it meant to be a part of NAYC as an organization, the kind of supports they needed. It was, if anybody's looking for an idea for a staff meeting, it was among the most extraordinary opportunities as an all staff to really root our work again and why we show up every day. It's been a really hard year. And understanding what brings us to this every day is, I think, part of what continues to allow us to move advocacy forward. Sometimes advocacy is like slamming your head into a brick wall over and over and over again every day. It gets exhausting, and knowing that you're doing it, why you keep slamming your head into a wall in the hopes that like one day when the window breaks, you're there for it, it really helps to be reminded. So for me, I really believe that everybody has strengths, that it is our responsibility to build on those strengths to ensure that they have equitable opportunities to succeed. And it is my commitment to build on those strengths and elevate the diverse voices of educators as advocates. And that's using my privilege and proximity to power to be able to get folks to the table. So it's important to just think again, why your story, why you do this work. That really is why you have to be an advocate, we talk about this. When I was thinking about sort of what's happening in early childhood education, this is like a random list, honestly, of just like in no specific order. The things that are percolating, the things that people are talking about, what's happening in early childhood education. There's minimum wage conversations. Which I have twice for some apparent reason, because it's happening in a lot of places. Parents are struggling. We're dealing with low compensation. There's regulatory challenges. There's family child. There's so many different issues, tax credits that are happening at the federal and state levels. These are questions, apprenticeships, and so many different conversations that are happening around early childhood education in South Dakota and at the federal level as well. That so much of what's happening outside of a work environment affects what happens inside of that work environment. And that is partly why, we see teachers rail against the challenges of what they're up against, and knowing that those decisions are being made somewhere else and trickling down to them, and that they have to go to that. They have to find the decision makers and advocate where they can for those changes to be made. So it really is helping people overcome the fear of advocacy, the sense of like that a lot of people have that like, I don't do politics, I don't want to get involved, that's not my thing, like I don't want to talk about it. Right. So we hear that all the time. I don't do politics. I'm like, that's okay, you don't have to do politics. I mean, who can blame you? That you cannot want to do politics. You cannot consider yourself political. That cannot be your jam. Like that is some people's jam. That does not have to be your jam in order for you to be an advocate, because it affects you and the things you care about, the kids and families that you work with so closely. So we hear a lot of things, people be like, okay, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. It's scary. I feel overwhelmed. It's like, there's a lot of fear that I think prevents people, this idea that something's going to go wrong. I'm going to say something wrong. I'm going to mess this up. I don't want to. So I'm curious, just like with the folks just on this call, folks who have come through this process, who were those people sort of saying like, this is not for me. What were some of your worries that were out there for you that acted as barriers in sort of becoming an advocate, and what you need to know in order to feel comfortable sort of overcoming that barrier of fear that we find so often gets in the way.
So Lauren, I got to jump in because last year was my first trip to the Capitol here in South Dakota, and I was terrified. It was a big, giant, daunting building with people in suits and, you know, fancy clothes everywhere, and that's so not me. But I had some people that I went with that were familiar with the space, and then actually just Monday I was there again, and I felt pretty confident to go in, although it didn't hurt having Carrie Sanderson with oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the acronym, CPCM, yeah, who grew up in Pierre and knew everybody, and so that was really fabulous. And I've had really positive connections with people there, I think, which helped me overcome the fear of going and doing it. Like, I really looked forward to going back this year, and then when we thought it was going to be virtual and we weren't going to go, and then last minute, you know, plans changed, but it was just really daunting, even having so many years in of experience working in the field and working in the field as a professional development specialist. You know, we rub elbows with directors and city officials and things like that, but it was it was scary. And I think for me too, admitting that I had those fears to like my people that I'm training or people that I'm talking with helps them to realize, you know, she has fears too, and that's okay, and we can get through this or do this together. So
yeah, absolutely.
And for me, I think it was realizing that they're just people. Just talking to a person like they're a normal person, not, I had someone say, they had this idea of what they wanted to change in their gym. And I said, well, the owner would probably really like to hear that. He's like, yeah, but how do I make the step from being like a gym member to just going and talking to the owner? I was like, well, you have to remember that the owner is just a person. And I think he opened that business to make those changes and have a best business that he can. Well, it's the same with a legislator, right? They're in that position for a reason, and they are just a person. And honestly, some of the biggest things that helped me was probably the public policy forum and that NACI holds every year when I was the public policy chair the first time for SDAYC. And then going from just, testifying for a bill in Pierre was like this huge step, and I was so scared. And now I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's like there's so many steps before you do that.
Yes.
That need to happen. So that was a big learning lesson for me.
Absolutely. Those are great. And I see a couple other folks too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna share. I think for me, where I get hung up is I can like go all day with people that are like-minded, right? So like all of us, we can just like beat this drum and we know it. And with a lot of like, at least from Brookings, where I'm from, a lot of our people are really supportive of a lot of the concepts we're talking about, have been leaders in the state in those areas. But when you move to people that have a mindset that I actually can't even like click into identifying with like where that came from, or like how they could feel that way about teachers, or how they could feel that way about not investing in children. I don't have like any arguments, because it just is like back to the very basic vein of our humanity. And so then I'm very confused, like all of us are, why investing in this area would not be important, and how you could possibly in your brain think to diminish it. So I guess I just get really stuck on that super, super different opinion type person. And those are the people, frankly, the silent people, and those people are the people we really need to work with. Because honestly, meeting with my crew, they're doing a lot of this work. So anyway, just a random idea there.
No, it's exactly right. I think that's coming out in the chat too, the sort of worry about how you handle folks who had disagreement with you, where you know going in some ways that like you are not going to be coming from the same place and you're not going to be having the same conversation exactly and how you get there. Go ahead.
Lauren, I would throw in though, in South Dakota, this situation's on steroids because what happens here is, and as somebody who has been in peer and testified in the K-12 world, along with the pre-K world, we could have 15, 20, 25 people lined up to argue for some measure that we believe is going to be positive, and they will have absolutely no one lined up. Or if they do, it's somebody out there who says, well, preschool is socialism. Or if you send your children to preschool, they're all going to become transgender and whatever. I mean, and it's craziness, and they're not challenged, and the measure won't even get out of committee. I mean, even though the lineup of people and the strong suit. So even there, people who are really, quite frankly, lobbyists who work for us just say, this is really, really hard stuff. This is really hard stuff to do in South Dakota at the state level, and that makes it really tough for somebody who is going to go out there for the first time.
It does. It makes it, I mean, these are really important points, and it does make it really difficult for first timers in particular, for all of us. I mean, this is really hard stuff when everything is so partisan, everything is so difficult, everything is part of a culture war. It's very hard. We've managed to keep early childhood bipartisan for a long time, and it is very hard to see some of the conversations that are happening, and for a person to feel like, well, why would I want to put myself in that situation? And arming them with the tools and supports and strategies that they need to be able to respond to it sort of as calmly and as possible, when it does address, to Kelly's point, it does address your fundamental humanity and feeling like that's being threatened and being sort of put at risk. I think it's a really difficult question. I do think what you guys are speaking to in terms of having a group of people going together, being able to be strong in that, being connected with other folks is one of the only possible solutions to that, to really say, you know, nobody goes alone. Everybody has a buddy, everybody has a mentor, everybody has supports, everybody is connected. There are times to process afterwards. To really build that kind of supportive network is the only way that you're going to be able to sort of withstand the confrontation that is there, and to know that that they can do that, and to practice in advance. I mean, we really do find that we take folks through rehearsal. I mean, and we ask them hard questions, and it's painful and not any fun, but we're all glad we've done it afterwards, to have that time to prepare as we go into, you know, when we go into conversations that we know are going to be particularly difficult. And I think, you know, to this point, like there is practice, it does actually make it rare. Like winging it comes later, when you've spent a lot of time sort of in the weeds doing it. And if you need to wing it, you can. But at first, you know, there's a balance between, you know, we tell people all the time, it's okay, like you can't say anything that wrong, like especially for people who are so afraid of opening their mouth, like you're going to be fine, you just tell your story, you'll be fine. And also it does help to practice so that you are sort of prepared with the questions that you might get and the pushback that you might get. And you know, again, you might find it's different now, but you might find, we found policymakers, at least their staff, are less likely to attack an actual early childhood educator than, say, one of us. They're just less likely to go after an educator who's there for the first time. They'll attack us, which is fine, but they're nicer they're nicer to the actual providers themselves. Yes, I think that's right. The motivation is practice. I mean, really, there's only one way to get through the confrontation, is to just say like, okay, we're going to practice it, because the first time everybody will just freeze, because it's like totally not it's not. There's a South Dakota piece of it. There's an early childhood education piece. There's probably a woman piece. Like there's just a lot to sort of being like, I don't want to do the confrontation thing, and sort of how you help people prepare and get through that, I think is really important, because they know it's going to be coming. So, when we talk about sort of, again, and this also gets to the question of defining this problem up front. What is it that we're trying to solve? And that's to Kayla's point early on about, are you able to find common ground? What is the problem that we're actually trying to solve here? For a politician who could care less about early childhood education, thinks that it's institutionalizing children. Do they care about getting parents back to work? Do they care about spending less money on welfare? Do they care about and need people? I mean, what is it? Do they have a goal that we can find a way into? And how do you define the problem in that way? So yeah, I want to talk about quality and child development. I want to talk about developmentally appropriate practice and equitable access, but those are not necessarily words I use depending on what office I'm in. And how do we get to where we're trying to go? That's right, in terms of the economic impact of early learning. And the short and long term, one of the things we've seen in the pandemic, obviously, is a focus on getting the economy running and getting people back to work. And we're not going to be able to do that without childcare. And so how do we get to our shared goals around what it is that folks care about? This is a side note. I will also say there is nothing like a new grandparent who ends up caring. Older men who, as policymakers, could not have cared less about this, but the second their daughter is confronting a childcare issue with their own family, it's I cannot tell you how many times it's been oh yeah, my daughter-in-law is, and I'm yeah. Amazingly, this happens in many families. Let's talk about it. But it just makes it's a remarkable transition into it matters to them. So then it matters to everybody. And again, sort of we hear this a lot as advocates. I know y'all do too, but it is very easy to identify the problems. It's very easy right now to identify the challenges. Defining a solution that can work, you do have to make it personal. Defining a solution that can really make it work, coming up with a specific solution, making sure this feels so obvious, but we all don't do it all the time. And coming to our meetings when we talk to policymakers about the solution that we're putting on the table to the problem that we're presenting to them, that is palatable to them, becomes really important as well. So I want to talk a little bit about, as we're getting into the advocacy, sort of some of the key decision makers that impact these pieces. What do they need to know? How do we share the information? One of the things that we talk about a lot is sort of understanding what happens when. So getting those timelines, the key dates at the local, state, and federal level. I can't tell you how many times we have worked with folks who are constructing really amazing policy recommendations, but the window of time in which to make those closed or isn't going to open again for 3 years. And again, that happens because we're building advocacy capacity and infrastructure. We're not going to get the timing windows right all the time, but having it out ahead of time, we're now outside of an election year, but elections will come again because they always do. And thinking about what your next elections are going to look like, who you need to talk to now to start getting their folks to think about a childcare plan. We want every person who is running for office on both sides of the aisle to feel like they have no choice but to have a childcare answer. What are they going to do to invest in high quality childcare? The first time they're asked, they will have no idea. The second time they're asked, they'll also have no idea. But by the 10th time they're asked, they're going to be like, oh, okay, I guess I need an answer for this. And they'll start to come up with a plan. They all need to have one so that whoever wins, we get to hold them accountable for implementing the plan that they said they had during their election campaign. This is entirely nonpartisan. This is all 501c3 work. As long as you're working with everybody, these are the long-term strategies for thinking about how to build this support across the aisle so that you're not just working with the folks once they're already in office and held accountable to the people who put them there. This is also in thinking about the federal opportunities. I'm not going to go into detail. We don't have time today. I'm not going to go into detail on the federal budgets and appropriations process and the reauthorization processes, but there are these key moments of advocacy opportunity when there's interest in doing more. There's opportunities to build some of this. You guys know, doing hearings and briefings, they can get, when reports are issued. Sometimes I wonder why we all do so many reports that often say the same things. And I'm tempted regularly to put out reports that we already put out 30 years ago, because I could probably change a word and have it be exactly the same. But there's media you can generate around a report. There's a briefing you can hold around a report. There's an op-ed you can write because you released a report. It's a way to generate advocacy work that draws attention to the messages you're trying to get out and continues to move that forward. So that there are reasons to sort of generate resources and things, even that they say the same things, so that you can keep generating the advocacy action around them. And follow up with your policymakers. Hey, we have a new report. Hey, here's what it looks like in your district. Like, hey, we wanted to draw your attention to this, so that you have a reason to keep reaching out to these folks and build those relationships. Oops, sorry. Okay, on the state advocacy opportunities, the same thing. I'm closing the chat because it's messing me up, so just flag me if we have chat conversations. One thing to flag, and this is actually, so obviously budget processes, but when state plans are being written and your CCDF state plans are being written now, we are into state planning process. This is a once in every 3 years window, and it is a real one. So being able, we can have a whole other conversation, and I know many folks are, about the state plans. There was a new resource released today from our friends at CLASP, actually this morning, that I can find and follow up with you on. And we had a conversation even just Monday, I know some folks were on, about sort of taking the opportunity to move forward. In all states they're required to do stakeholder engagement when it comes to developing their CCDF plan. This is an opportunity to talk to educators, to bring them to the state plans. We can all remember many a time when state planning meetings are held publicly and only one person attends. We would like to not have that happen this time. Folks need to show up for state plan engagement meetings. This is an opportunity to say, here's what we need in South Dakota for our child care plan. Let's build it into the plan moving forward, because your state has to submit these to the federal government. When systems are being reworked, when we're relooking at regulatory structures, when we're relooking at QRISs and competencies, these are the windows of time to move things and to really think about how we're able to move this work forward. Any questions about any of that? Because there are a couple of good opportunities coming up.
I think just to let everyone know on the call that that is something Early Learner South Dakota is looking into and actively working on currently. So just if people do have more questions or want to become involved in that process, you can always reach out to myself, Janessa, or go on the website. We have a chat bot on there. You can get questions answered that way too.
Yeah, and I just attended a fantastic call as I was driving back from the Capitol on Monday with other affiliates and across the nation, and hearing ways that they're overcoming challenges, working with their state reports. Like it's almost like a trifecta is happening right now. We have this great momentum with Early Learner South Dakota, people coming on board, the silos are breaking down, and it happens to be the year that we're doing the state plan. So we are really working on that. And Lauren, we may be reaching out for some more.
Please do. Please
awesome.
do.
Thank you.
Lots of ideas about what folks can build into their state plans, but it is a real opportunity, not least because it then gives you an opportunity to hold, again, much of this is about figuring out ways to hold people accountable for what they said they were going to do. So if you get it in the state plan, then you have a window of being able to say, hey, 2 years from now, remember when we said we were going to do this? I'm coming back to talk about it. Let's find a way to move this forward.
Well, yeah, and so many of us on this call here, that state plan actually impacts the work that we're doing on a daily basis.
Deeply.
So, yeah.
Can I ask another question about that accountability? And I'm thinking about my work with the CASA work board that I'm on and things I do, because we actually do in South Dakota have some great child protection policies with words such as mandated investigation and all these things. But we investigate only 14% of cases of child abuse. We're the lowest in the nation. Who do you then hold accountable, and how do you start asking those questions about some of that terminology? And if this is too far off topic, I can email you that question too, Lauren.
We could probably talk some more about it offline and sort of what recourses you have in different places. There are oversight resources, basically, like people need to know if they are not holding up their end of mandated requirements. You know, there's all kinds of unfunded mandates, obviously, in every area, and what they can and cannot sort of be held accountable for and what your recourses are. And the child welfare frame is different sometimes. It's a whole other.
Yep.
But there are oversights. There are things that, you know, there are investigations that can be had. There are ways to move it forward.
Okay.
Lauren, would you like me to share your contact information in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also at the end, and can send these slides to you all so you can have that. But yeah, absolutely. And feel free to use it. The other thing, I think one piece that comes up a lot for us in thinking about not only when are things happening, but who does what when you're thinking about becoming an advocate, when you're working on getting more deeply engaged in advocacy. We talk a lot about, barking up the wrong tree, where we ask policymakers to make changes to things that are not within their jurisdiction to change. So the child welfare is a great one. Like, this is something that we'd want to talk, we want to talk to you about this. They're like, it's not my department. It's not my committee. It's not my jurisdiction. Like, I can't do. So figuring out who is responsible for what. We ask federal policymakers to change things that are within state policy purview. Like, and there's just they tune out a little bit when they sort of are brought challenges that are not within their capacity to solve. So really making sure as leaders, and then translating that to advocates, to educators, to make sure that when we're asking them for solutions, it's within their capacity to resolve. I would also add, again, early childhood educators really do understand the importance of relationships of all professions. Like, this is a profession that gets the importance of relationships between children and families. Being an advocate is not that different. Building the relationships with policymakers is the thing that makes a difference, and that neutralizes some of this just absolute negativity in terms of the challenges that people are facing, the anger that is directed our way. It is one thing to dismiss somebody who comes once or testifies once. It's another thing to do that to somebody who has reached out, not just to ask for something, but to introduce themselves, to talk about what's happening in their community, to offer them a tour of the childcare center when we can all do those again. To be there over time, building these relationships so that it isn't just, hey, I need more money, though we always need more money, but it is also, I'd like to, we're your constituents, and I'd like you to see what happens in your community and in your state. Like, can you come to a childcare center? And if what they want out of that is a photo op, then okay, let's make that work for everybody. Obviously, this is sort of the goal in terms of significant public investments that are needed. And there is no solution to this that isn't federal. I'll be really clear about that. The state cannot, the state needs to put in support, but the kind of money that we really need to transform childcare is federal money. And so building these relationships with your federal lawmakers in the House and the Senate also, again, I know there are challenges. I know there are challenges. And there's also opportunity. There are really great lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who will surprise us sometimes with an interest in this. And your governor, when she was a representative, got childcare. I know there are challenges, but we had conversations with Kayla, and we would talk. She understood, her staff understood some of the childcare challenges. I have to believe some of that understanding is still there in terms of being able to move some of that forward. So organizing obviously there's really no way to do this without sort of organizing people to be able to move this forward. Thinking about partners, and obviously there are educators who want to prioritize educator voice. Parents are another key piece of this. And I don't know what South Dakota has done in terms of, working with parent groups, but there are many times when we're advocating for investments in early childhood education, parents and providers end up being a little bit on opposite sides sometimes. Parents are driven primarily by the need for affordable childcare, right? They need it to be affordable and it isn't. And educators need additional investments in their compensation. They need support for and that often reads to parents as it's going to increase my costs. Getting parents and educators on the same side for being able to say we need investments that make all childcare and early childhood education more affordable, accessible, and high quality, and that invests in educators. It's a public investment that's needed. It can't fall on parents who can't pay more, educators who can't make less. It cannot fall on either of those individuals. So being able to look at how to get parents together when we're advocates, and then how to think about the sort of different professions. I know folks have talked with business leaders, thinking about there's many opportunities to think about all of the, the business leaders in each community who really make a difference in terms of saying, especially right now, my ability to employ my workers is dependent on whether or not they have childcare. I need there to be an investment in childcare so that I can have my business open and functioning. Do folks have thoughts about partners who they've worked with, parents, business successes they've had, or challenges?
Lauren, I don't know about specific questions right now, but one thing with the pandemic, a silver lining, and I've heard many people say this, is that economic development is now asking to be at the table. I remember the look on the face of somebody out here, and it was just like, I don't know what to do. Like this, I've never dealt with this before. I have so many businesses calling me saying they need childcare, and it really opened their eyes. And I think that brought many more partners to our table because of that, and people that are more strongly advocating with us now due to the pandemic. And I'm seeing like our Brookings, our new community, economic development led the charge in that community. And I believe there was somebody else, I'm not sure if they're on the call today, reached out to me after one of our other meetings, I believe on Monday, and they want to have some talks, and it's their economic development leading the charge as well. So
that's great.
Yeah.
That's really great. And also, they also need support to be advocates. Like, how do they talk about this work? What do they understand about early childhood education? Business leaders understand both the immediate needs of their workforce, and they also understand the long term. They can get their heads around the child development message as well. For many years, actually, they've been really great at that message. And really helping to prepare them so that they're carrying forward the message that we need them to carry forward, and not just the message that they need to carry forward, so that it is that partnership in terms of being able to move these pieces forward together. We talked a little bit about the challenges of the state legislature right now and what that looks like, and identifying a leader who can be a champion for the issue can be really tough. But, thinking about who that leader is, where they're situated, what committee they are on, who they have access to, how close to the governor are they? These are all of the questions, again, not just as leaders, but also as working with your network of advocates, really intentionally identifying like, okay, this person is in charge of this committee. We need to get them into a center or home, family childcare home in their constituent. Who do we know there that we can work with to get that? That kind of stuff changes investments over time. It moves people's minds. It it takes that kind of real intentional putting of pieces together to really be able to get the work forward. And again, this sort of leadership relationship development that happens, maybe not in a month, maybe even not in a session, but over time. And if it isn't this leader that is in the committee that you're going to be able to move, the one who is in a deputy position who's going to take it in a couple of years. There's a long-term aspect to this too, is like, who are your cultivating leaders now? Who's the mayor? I mean, and you guys have worked with Rapid City. Who's the mayor who's going to run for the next open House Senate seat? Those kinds of sort of predictions ahead are what gets you into having leadership grow into this issue and own it as theirs. Obviously, nobody's in a perfect world. So we start with the people who represent us, because that's at the very least, they have to listen to you as a constituent. Even if they don't hold town halls anymore, and even if they're not going to pick up the phone, you are still a constituent, which gives you the ability, whoever they are, whichever advocate it is, to be able to say, I live in your district and I want to talk to you about childcare in your district. We've talked about learning about these issues does not happen by osmosis. It happens a lot for advocates. We think that because we know something, everybody knows the thing that we know, and we forget that that's not true, that people really don't know. They don't know. They need to be educated on it, and they probably need to be educated on it over and over and over again. We talked a little bit about this issue about sort of working with opponents, and it's gotten tougher. There's no question about that. It's gotten tougher. And finding out who doesn't agree with you, identifying the reason for their opposition, and finding ways to neutralize it. Again, sometimes the issue is not, can we get you to support this issue, but can we get you to stay quiet on it? Can we get you not to oppose it? I don't need to win everybody over. Not everybody's going to become a like rock hard champion for early childhood education, but can we get you to just stand down on it? Can we get you to just like neutralize a little bit? That's a goal too, and that's a win. Don't take it any other way. It's a win sometimes if they just, or if they put out a tepid statement. If they go from being like strongly oppositional to being like, I don't like it. It's like, that's also a win. Like, your less vehement opposition is also a good goal. So to take it just like down a few notches sometimes and think about, you know, can you get to compromise? Can you get to less virulent and less vehement opposition? And who do you need to do that? Is there somebody who can set that leadership for their colleagues? If they dial it back, will their colleagues dial it back also? Will they follow that leadership to make that happen? That can also be a really helpful strategy in terms of working with opponents. And who will they listen to? Who can get to them? Who are the people in their network? Who do they see? Who do they interact with? What do they need to see on social media, on their Facebook page or on their Twitter page for it to start making a difference? And not just them, but their staff as well. And that really makes a huge difference as well. Questions about sort of opposition and opponents, because I know it's a big issue. It really is.
I mean, I guess I don't know for sure if this is really the best question, but like, I know that we've even done some work about, you know, we've kind of taken a sheet of all current legislators in South Dakota, and we've kind of taken a poll of where we think they fall in regards to supporting early learning or not.
Yep.
And as far as we always kind of came to the conclusion that the people riding the fence, we coded them as yellow, probably would be the best to kind of focus on to tip them to the early childhood way. So if we were looking at our red section, who are very opposed to early learning, well, like, what's one thing you would suggest that would be our best course of action?
For your 5 is never gonna gonna get there, folks.
Right.
I think it depends. I mean, so I'm a big fan. Again, this is a little more difficult virtually. I'm a big fan of getting people into for site visits. I think it makes a big difference for people to see actually what happens in an early childhood center. They don't know, they don't understand. I mean, not to generalize, but like their wives were home with their kids. I mean, it's like there's not an understanding about what happened. What are the skills? It's dismissible until you see it. You see an educator working with a kid, making a difference. You see the quality, and something happens. You understand it a little more. You got to go back and keep going with it. But I'm a big fan of site visits, and there's virtual site visits that are happening. They like publicity. They like looking like they care about kids. Everybody likes looking like they care about kids. So if they get an opportunity for publicity out of it, like, all right, fine. I will trade you your publicity story on looking like you care about kids for an opportunity to tell you about what's happening in early childhood education so that you understand it. And I would say to your questions on sort of, it's always helpful for us actually to hear what you guys are hearing in terms of the pushback. What are the most common arguments that you're hearing? Is it still around this, like, right, pre-K is institutionalizing kids to become liberal Democrats who will all be transgender? Like, is it, we don't have the money? Like, sure, this is important, but we don't have the money. What are the arguments that are feeling most salient to you? Because we generally, and again, this is something we help with on a national basis too, is like, here are the talking points that we're using right now to respond to these issues. See if they work. Like, adapt them for your context, figure out, but we're happy to, we talk to folks in all the states, and helping to get a consistent message out is also really helpful. So having those answers. And the last thing I would say, people looking at local journalism is in a tough spot right now, but people do look at their letters to the editor and the op-eds that are being written in their hometown papers, or that are showing up, where they need to see what's being told about them in the press story. So being able to get somebody that they care about putting an article in a paper about this issue that you can then send to them and say, like, hey, again, we wanted you to make sure this is on your radar. We'd love to talk to you more about it. Those kinds of conversations, I think, can be really helpful.
Lauren, I would throw in, if I may, I think that one of the things that happens in South Dakota is that, again, we have one party rule, and that one party is always going to say local control, local control, local control, up until the point in time when they want to make it state control. Then it's going to be a whole different issue on whatever topic it needs to be. Right now, transgender or whatever. And so what they have is an out, and they always have, and they have this out in K-12, and it applies in pre-K. The state allocates only so much money, but they have created a system in K-12 where local entities can opt out of the tax limitation, and they can tax the local people more. So that legislator can say, we're always trying to keep your taxes down. If you want to do more, it's going to be up to the local school board or the city council or your county board or whatever it happens to be to do that. And that is always an out in this situation too, is there is no state funding for preschool, but if you want to do it in your local community, well, go for it. You can still do that, which then again puts that local person in really tough situations. And it's not economically necessarily the best thing to do when statewide programs could cover a lot more, and do it more financially that way. Probably the biggest thing is when you ask, what's the pushback? Unfortunately, we still have a sizable percentage of legislators who do not believe that children should be outside of the home before they start kindergarten. It's mom needs to be at home with that, and they believe one income, and they don't understand, how that all works. They are not out there. And the other part of it is that, and I think this is the other part, is that they don't understand the importance of early learning. And they just, again, they're working with an outdated model. They think early learning is some social skills and potty training, and they don't understand what goes into all of that. And they're just not willing to pay for it. They just say, it's hard enough for us to fund in this state K-12. We're not adding anything more. And they cut it off right there. And they are not necessarily against it. They just don't want to pay for it. And they don't want to pay it for somebody else's kids.
I mean, that all tracks with, I mean, arguments that we've been hearing forever and ever. I mean, we don't want to pay for somebody else's kids. I will say, I've been on this trip lately, but it is the 50th anniversary of the year that Nixon vetoed childcare entitlement bill. You might be hearing more about this because we're trying to make you think. 50 years ago, Nixon vetoed a childcare bill, and the veto that is, you can read it as written, I mean, is all of these pieces. It's socialism, it's a nanny state. I mean, it's like in some ways we haven't come that far. In many ways we haven't come that far. And it is so, I mean, there's many different pieces that I know we're already coming up on the end. So I'm probably gonna save all of the rationales for how to respond to some of these. And you guys know, I mean, how to respond to some of these again, but there is a way in which showing them the skills in early childhood education will do more than any brain development chart we can talk about until the cows come home. I mean, we can talk about brain development, we can talk about how important it is, we can talk about the fact that South Dakota has the highest percentage of 2 working families. I mean, until they see it, until they hear it, it's why getting educator voices and parent voices in front of them is just always in their own community, from their own community. It doesn't matter if it's somebody else. And it definitely doesn't help in South Dakota for it to be a national voice. I mean, it can't, like, this is one of those states where it's like, please do not, we don't want to hear about what's happening in any of, we don't want to hear about what's happening in Massachusetts or Washington or Oregon. Like, do not talk to us about that. This is about what's happening in your community, in your local, to your local point, like who is happening in that state, who is happening in that community that can really say, look, I'm like you, and yet here is what I need in terms of moving in terms of achieving our goals to be able to make South Dakota into the kind of state that we want it to be. It gets to this question of data and stories, it really does. You are most effective with these pieces. And it is why we need educators to overcome their fears and be able to talk about these pieces, because they are the most effective messengers for all of this. I will probably just roll through the end and just save a couple of minutes. I know we've been asking questions throughout, but there are lots of different ways to engage too. Kayla, you talked about testifying. That's like way down the line, right? Like there are lots of easier ways to start to engage, so testifying is important. We have lots of resources, how to invite policymaker to a site visit, how to organize a site visit for a policymaker. We have a virtual congressional toolkit that we've been using. Our policy forum is coming up. We are virtual this year, but we're really excited to welcome all of the state teams, and we'll have lots of resources and workshops and sessions to share that we hope folks will join as part of their state team. And I will say this is probably like one of the most important slides is the again part. There is a lot of like, okay, great, we did that. Like, and it is this ongoingness of being an advocate that makes the difference ultimately, because one meeting can be ignored, one site visit can be ignored. You went and check, it's done. You got to keep it in their forefront of, you know, where they say, fine, you know, for your most ardent opponents, where they say, you want your champions to have this be on the top of their priority list, not somewhere down at the bottom. And you want your opponents to be able to say, like, fine, I don't like all of these things that we disagree on, but like, okay, like I get you on childcare, I get you on early childhood education. I understand why that piece is important. So it really, they do need your expertise. This stuff does make a difference. It moves things. I mean, we've seen this move stuff in states all over. Things do change. I can't believe I sound so positive right now because it has been a long, things really, I'm like, man, I sound enthusiastic, but things do change, honestly. And there are opportunities for advocacy and engagement to come together. The community of moving this, there has to be a community for this. You've got to be part of a community. Join your affiliate. For those of you who are not part already, join your affiliate. You've got to be part of a community to be able to move this forward, or you will get tired of running into a brick wall. If you have friends to run into a brick wall with, then eventually somebody takes a turn running and you can sort of take a turn to fall back. So we hope folks will stay connected and engaged, and we'll stop and take questions at the end.
Thank you, guys. I know that we have just like a minute or two left. Our next session is going to happen at 11:45. So when does anyone have any questions before we close the session today? You can come off mute. You can type in. Gosh, I wish I would have given you like another half an hour, Lauren. This is always such amazing information. I know again that this will be recorded. It will be put on the site. Let's see. This is the topic for Black Hills SDOIC meeting on February 20th. Oh, okay. Awesome. Thanks, Jesse.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say advocacy training is one of our goals this coming year with SDAEYC, and making sure that our chapters are equipped. And part of that was, kits that went out for early learner to all the chapters. And we're really starting to make sure that those chapter reps are trained, like Jesse is a chapter rep. We're working on that, and we hope to work with NACI more in the future as well.
And I would just give NACI a plug too. If you guys are not a member, please consider becoming a member. You have all the access to these amazing resources Janessa mentioned and these amazing people. So Janessa is a great person to ask about that, or Jesse. So feel free to reach out to one of us. Lauren, any closing statements?
No, it has been just a pleasure to work with South Dakota, the AUIC, with Janessa and Kayla over these years. And there are opportunities ahead and things do change. And I'm just so excited to have so many folks here today thinking about becoming advocates, and take heart and courage in moving forward.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, guys. I hope you'll be joining us for the legislative panel in 15 minutes. It is a separate link, so please go on to the website, and we'll see you in 15. Thanks again, Lauren.
Thank you all so much.
All right, bye.